Every time Israel strikes at Iran, something unusual happens. Tehran's response isn't designed for maximum damage. It's calibrated for maximum information. Watch the pattern carefully. When Israel conducts operations against Iranian nuclear facilities, assassinates key scientists, or sabotages military infrastructure, Iran responds, but not the way conventional military doctrine would suggest. Instead of immediate, overwhelming retaliation, Tehran delivers measured counterstrikes while carefully observing something far more valuable: how NATO fractures in response. The paradox is striking. Israel acts from a position it perceives as strength, driven by desperate urgency about Iran's advancing nuclear timeline. Yet each action inadvertently provides Tehran with strategic intelligence about Western alliance fault lines. When Israeli operations escalate tensions, the responses from Washington, Paris, Berlin, and London consistently diverge. The United States issues statements of support. France calls for restraint. Germany emphasizes diplomatic solutions. Britain navigates somewhere between European powers refuse participation in certain military operations. Sanctions positions differ. De-escalation proposals is conflict. Iran documents every discrepancy. What if Tehran has discovered that NATO's greatest vulnerability isn't military capacity or technological inferiority, but something far more fundamental: the structural impossibility of maintaining alliance cohesion outside the Euro-Atlantic theater? The alliance that presents unified deterrence when defending Poland fragments into competing national interests when operating in the Middle East. What looks like Iranian caution is actually Iranian reconnaissance, and Israel's desperation is providing the perfect laboratory to map NATO's real boundaries. This revelation carries implications that extend far beyond the Persian Gulf, potentially reshaping how adversaries everywhere understand the true limits of Western collective security. The escalation between Israel and Iran has followed a distinct pattern over recent years, and the international response has been equally predictable in its fragmentation. When Israeli intelligence officials briefed NATO allies on Iran's nuclear progress, presenting assessments that Tehran was advancing toward weapons capability, the reactions split cleanly along geographic lines. Washington accepted the intelligence and intensified pressure campaigns. European capitals requested additional verification, emphasized uncertainty margins, and questioned whether military options should even be considered. The same intelligence produced fundamentally different policy conclusions. Military operations revealed even sharper divisions. When Israel conducted strikes against Iranian-linked targets in Syria or sabotage operations against nuclear infrastructure, the United States provided intelligence support, defensive coordination, and diplomatic cover. European NATO members offered none of these. France and Germany instead pursued independent diplomatic engagement with Tehran, sometimes explicitly positioning themselves as mediators, a role that required distancing from Israeli actions their American ally quietly enabled. The key actors operate from irreconcilable positions. Israel views Iranian nuclear and missile programs as existential threats, demanding urgent preventive action before a threshold is crossed. The United States supports Israeli security, but must balance broader regional interests, oil market stability, relations with Gulf states, and avoiding direct conflict that would strain resources needed for strategic competition with China. European NATO members prioritize diplomatic engagement, protect economic interests, including energy diversification after severing Russian supplies, and face domestic constituencies exhausted by Middle East military entanglements. Iran observes all of this with clinical precision. This moment differs from previous tensions in critical ways. Israeli assessments suggest Iran approaches nuclear threshold capability, creating time pressure that amplifies desperation for decisive action. Europe's energy vulnerability post-Ukraine makes Middle East stability essential, but military involvement politically toxic. American strategic bandwidth increasingly focuses on China, limiting appetite for new Middle East commitments. Each time Israel pushed for unified Western action, the response revealed something Iran was carefully documenting. NATO exists in Europe, but only American power exists in the Middle East. NATO was born in 1949 with a singular purpose: collective defense against Soviet aggression in Europe. Article 5 codified the commitment. An attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all. The alliance's legitimacy, integrated command structures, and political consensus mechanisms were designed exclusively for Euro-Atlantic theater defense. Geography and threat were both clearly defined. This clarity disappeared after the Cold War. The alliance's first ventures beyond its founding mandate revealed inherent tensions. Yugoslavia in the 1990s tested NATO's ability to conduct offensive operations, but the conflict remained European, allowing members to justify intervention as regional stabilization. Afghanistan changed everything. After September 11th, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time in its history, but applying collective defense to operations in Central Asia created immediate friction about mission, scope, duration, and strategic purpose. What began as counterterrorism metastasized into nation-building, straining alliance cohesion for 2 decades. Libya in 2011 exposed even deeper fractures. France and Britain pushed for intervention. Germany abstained entirely. The United States, war-weary from Iraq and Afghanistan, adopted what officials called leading from behind, a phrase that captured Washington's ambivalence about European-initiated operations outside the North Atlantic area. The mission succeeded in removing Gaddafi, but left Libya fragmented, validating skeptics who questioned whether NATO possessed political coherence for out-of-area actions. The Middle East specifically creates structural stress within the alliance. European colonial history, British and French mandates, protectorates, and post-imperial relationships created fundamentally different ties to regional states than America developed. Energy dependencies diverged sharply. European economies relied heavily on Gulf oil and gas. American fracking revolution produced energy independence, eliminating shared vulnerability. Immigration concerns made Europeans prioritize Middle East stability over confrontation, fearing refugee flows that American geography largely insulates against. Domestic political constraints differ dramatically. European publics, exhausted by Iraq and Afghanistan, opposed new Middle East military entanglements. Constitutional frameworks in parliamentary democracies require legislative approval for military action that American presidents can authorize through executive authority. These aren't just political differences, they're structural features that make coordinated military action systematically difficult. The Israel-Iran dimension amplifies every division. Most European nations maintain diplomatic relations with Tehran. Israel does not. European companies held a significant economic interest in Iran before American sanctions forced painful choices between Iranian markets and US financial system access. Strategic cultures diverged fundamentally. European emphasis on diplomacy and multilateralism versus Israeli doctrine of preemption and military solutions. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action perfectly illustrated these gaps. European powers invested enormous diplomatic capital negotiating the nuclear deal. When the Trump administration withdrew in 2018, European allies attempted to preserve the agreement despite American sanctions pressure, creating the extraordinary spectacle of close NATO allies actively working to circumvent US policy. Sanctions enforcement became inconsistent. Intelligence assessments about Iranian compliance and nuclear timeline varied between Washington and European capitals. Even designations differed. The EU listed Hezbollah's military wing as terrorist while recognizing political dimensions that Israel and America rejected entirely. NATO was built to stop Soviet tanks in the Fulda Gap, not to coordinate airstrikes in the Persian Gulf. Iran understands this better than most Western strategists do. The hidden strategic story. Iran's strategy isn't defensive, it's diagnostic. Every action Tehran takes in its confrontation with Israel serves a dual purpose: immediate tactical effect and long-term intelligence gathering about Western alliance architecture. The pattern operates with clinical precision. Iran advances its nuclear program incrementally, enrichment levels increase, centrifuge cascades, expand research. Continues at facilities, Israeli intelligence monitors closely. Each advancement is calibrated to provoke reaction without triggering overwhelming response. When Israel strikes back sabotaging facilities, eliminating scientists, conducting cyber attacks, Iran observes how NATO fragments. The response mapping is systematic. Does the United States provide real-time intelligence for Israeli operations or maintain plausible distance? Do European NATO members offer diplomatic cover, or do they issue statements calling for restraint that implicitly criticize Israeli actions? Will Britain coordinate defensively, or will it echo Franco-German calls for de-escalation? Each Israeli operation becomes a test that reveals which alliance members provide intelligence support, which offer military assets, which supply diplomatic backing, and which actively distance themselves. Iran's intelligence services and diplomatic corps document every variation. Over repeated cycles, these observations create detailed maps of alliance cohesion boundaries, precisely where unity ends and national interest divergence begins. Israel's desperation functions as an amplifier that makes these divisions visible. Israeli leadership genuinely perceives Iranian nuclear advancement as an existential threat operating on a compressed timeline. Intelligence briefings emphasize urgency breakout capability, approaching window for preventive action closing, regional balance shifting irreversibly. This perception drives intense pressure on allies for support. But urgency isn't shared equally. The United States views Iranian nuclear capability as deeply concerning, but not existential manageable, through deterrence and containment if prevention fails. European allies consider it even more remote from core national interests, serious but not worth military confrontation that could destabilize energy markets, trigger refugee flows, or entangle their forces in another Middle East conflict. When Israeli officials push for coordinated action, the differentiated responses expose precisely what Iran needs to understand. America might provide limited intelligence sharing and defensive cooperation while counseling restraint on offensive operations. Europeans typically resist, entirely emphasizing diplomatic channels and questioning the necessity of military options. Iran doesn't create these divisions, Israel's desperation reveals them. Each urgent appeal that receives fragmented responses provides Tehran with intelligence about alliance boundaries under stress. The temporal dimension reveals another strategic advantage. NATO democracies operate on electoral cycles, leadership transitions, and shifting public attention. American administrations change every 4 or 8 years, bringing policy reversals. European governments face coalition, politics, parliamentary constraints, and publics weary of Middle East involvement. Iran's decision-making operates on longer horizons with more consistent leadership structures. By extending negotiations, creating periodic crises, then de-escalating Iran tests, whether NATO cohesion can be sustained over years, the evidence consistently suggests it cannot. The JCPOA demonstrates this perfectly negotiated, multilaterally implemented, with European investment, abandoned by one U.S. administration partially preserved by European allies despite American pressure, then gradually eroded as political will and practical mechanisms decayed. Iran learned that Western alliance coordination degrades over time, especially when immediate threat perception differs among members. Economic instruments provide another lever for fragmentation. When American sanctions intensified, European companies faced impossible choices: comply and lose Iranian market access, or maintain business and risk U.S. financial system penalties. Different European governments made different calculations based on national economic interests. Some enforced sanctions rigorously, others sought workarounds. Post-Ukraine energy crises amplified these divergences dramatically. European desperate need for energy diversification gave Iran leverage that directly affected military policy preferences. Governments protecting potential future energy relationships proved resistant to military confrontation. Intelligence assessment differences create exploitable gaps. U.S. intelligence presentations about Iranian capabilities sometimes differ from European services conclusions. European governments, remembering Iraq WMD intelligence failures, question American assessments more skeptically. Iran tracks which allies trust U.S. intelligence versus maintaining independent evaluations, understanding that intelligence disagreement prevents coordinated action. The proxy network functions as a distributed diagnostic system. Hezbollah operations near Israel's northern border, Iraqi militia attacks on U.S. positions, Houthi strikes against shipping Syrian-based activities, each tests different response thresholds. Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping prompted some NATO naval responses, but not others, revealing which members consider freedom of navigation vital versus peripheral. Hezbollah tensions with Israel receive European diplomatic engagement, but rarely military support offers. Each proxy action diagnostics, which threats NATO members, consider critical mapping the geography of alliance commitment with precision. Iran maintains this diagnostic apparatus through diplomatic double games. Tehran preserves channels with France, Germany, and other European powers even while confronting Israel and America. European foreign ministers visit Tehran. Trade discussions continue despite sanctions. Nuclear negotiations remain theoretically open. This creates situations where European NATO members must repeatedly choose between alliance solidarity with Washington and national interests in maintaining Iranian dialogue. The choices are consistently visible. When Israel and America pursue maximum pressure, Europeans pursue engagement. When Washington demands sanctions enforcement, European governments seek exemptions. When Israeli intelligence presents threat briefings, European capitals request independent verification. These aren't occasional disagreements, they're systematic patterns revealing structural limitations. The ultimate insight Iran has gained is profound. NATO's collective defense guarantees function only within the alliance's founding geography and threat conception. The Article 5 commitment that maintains credible deterrence in Europe disaggregates into competing national interests in the Middle East. This isn't political failure or lack of will, it's an architectural feature of how the alliance was designed and what maintains its cohesion. Israel's desperate push for decisive action against Iran doesn't create this reality, it makes it undeniably visible. Every urgent appeal for support that receives fragmented responses, every intelligence briefing that produces divergent policy conclusions, every requested operation that some allies support while others oppose confirms what Tehran has systematically documented. Iran isn't trying to defeat NATO in the Middle East. It's proving that NATO doesn't actually exist in the Middle East. Israel's urgency just made the evidence undeniable. Why this changes everything. Iran's demonstration of NATO's Middle East incoherence doesn't remain contained within the Persian Gulf. Adversaries worldwide are watching, learning, and adjusting their strategic calculations accordingly. China's military strategists and policy analysts closely monitor NATO's performance in every theater using observed alliance behavior to model likely responses to potential Taiwan scenarios. If NATO cannot coordinate a unified position on Iranian nuclear advancement, a challenge involving a mid-tier power with limited global reach, how would the alliance respond to Chinese action in the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, or Indian Ocean? Beijing observes that European NATO members resist military involvement in Middle East crises despite strong American preferences. The precedent suggests European capitals would prove even more reluctant to support military operations in the Western Pacific, where direct national interests are more remote and Chinese economic leverage more substantial. Russia conducts similar analysis regarding NATO cohesion beyond the immediate Eastern European frontline. Moscow has learned that alliance unity strengthens dramatically when threats approach member territory. Poland, the Baltics, Romania receive credible collective defense, but observe how that unity degrades with geographic distance. If NATO fragments over Middle East policy, Russian strategists calculate that alliance response to gray zone operations in Africa, Central Asia, or other peripheries would likely fragment similarly along national interest lines.